Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for braving the awful weather tonight to come here. I know if it was me, I would probably stay home wrapped in a blanket or something. So I'm Ryder Mackay. I work at Flixel with Mark and Carl, who are normally here, but they're both on vacation, enjoying much better weather. And I'm going to talk to you about supporting Touch Bar in your Mac app, or Sushi Bar, as my wife likes to call it. So I just thought I'd start by saying that Mac apps are awesome if you haven't built any before. Can I just get a show of hands? Who's made a Mac app before? And who currently makes Mac apps? And come talk to me if any of this sounds interesting, because we are hiring. Anyway, yeah, you can build and run on the same machine and debug, and that's basically the best thing. And also release directly to customers, another good thing. Anyway, enough about that stuff. So let's get right to Touch Bar. So hardware-wise, it's an OLED display with wide color, and it's a Retina display as well. The resolution is 2170 by 60 pixels, or 1085 by 30 points at 2x. It has an integrated Touch ID sensor. If you're into that, look at local authentication framework. I'm not going to talk about that. And the really cool thing is that the Touch Bar is composed of multiple controls and bars from many different processes on macOS. And then all that is rendered in macOS, and then it's sent over the bridge to the bridge device just to show up. So what is it made of? There's the system button on the far left. That's the escape key that everybody was freaking out about not being there. It's there. Sometimes the system will replace it with a done or a cancel button in modal contexts. You can do that in your app too, but do so sparingly. Then there's the app region that I'm going to spend the majority of the talk talking about. You can put your Coca controls in there, so sliders, toggle buttons, segmented controls, a new thing called a scrubber. And then there's the control strip. This is its mini form, and it can also expand to its expanded form. It's extensible by the system, not by you, and you might also see Xcode put like a little debugger system tray thing in there that can pop out. It's cool, but we don't get to do that. It's also customizable, so you can customize the small mini form and the expanded form as well. I like the sleep and screen lock buttons. The screenshot one's pretty good too. So the running theme of Touch Bar is that it's dynamic and customizable. So by default, it's going to show app controls with the mini control strip, which is expandable. You can set it to only display the expanded control strip or just app controls. So here's mail.app with its main message viewer Touch Bar that's been customized. So it's adding some other controls like mark as read, which is what I do all the time. Sorry, mark as unread, and show conversation. And then if you hold down the function key, you can also get back your function keys or configure that to show the expanded control strip if you want. And finally, for legacy apps, there's an escape hatch in system preferences. So if you have something that you need to use function keys in and want them to show up all the time, you can drag an app in there. And on Boot Camp, you get function keys as well. But modern Mac applications support Touch Bar. So here are all of Apple's apps that ship with macOS. I threw in Xcode as well, because we all use it. And these are the ones that support Touch Bar. So that's most of them. And here are all the utilities that ship with OS X, and even some of those support Touch Bar as well. Like Terminal has a cool man page button. So if you enter in a command and you forget what it is or what it does, you get a dedicated man page. I think it's awesome. In addition to application-specific support, there's also deep framework support for Touch Bar. So AppKit is the framework that defines the Touch Bar, but also many of its controls and alerts and open and save panels are going to display their own Touch Bars when they're active. In QuickTime Player, you'll see playback and trim controls in the touch bar, as well as capture controls, and that comes from AVKit. So if you use that in your application, you get it for free. Contacts UI, you're going to see that in the Contacts app, and then even WebKit is going to give you media playback controls. So what kind of controls should you put in a touch bar? Well, obviously it's going to depend on your app, but you should see it as a supplement to existing window controls and other UI like menus and keyboard input. There's no dedicated API for detecting if the computer you're running on has a touch bar. That's by design. So you're not supposed to rely on it, just supplement. It's another input mechanism. Again, don't duplicate well-known shortcuts, so things that are in everybody's muscle memory, like Command-Z to undo. You don't want to have a dedicated undo button in the touch bar, because that's already a keyboard shortcut thing. You want to make common or powerful, deeply nested actions accessible, like bring them to the user's fingertips. And try to start and finish tasks in the touch bar. So a good example of that is Mail has a special like Move To button that normally you would click and drag a message from, say, your inbox to some folder for archiving. You can do that entirely in the touch bar by tapping on Move To and then selecting, making a selection. So that's an example of something that occurs just in the touch bar. And your touch bar should be context or selection specific. So often you're going to pair them with whatever is currently first responder. So like if you're doing a Canvas-based app or a drawing app, depending on what you have selected, you can show different controls. And layout. So as I showed you before, the region of space that's available to your application can change during the lifetime of your app, so don't design your app with a fixed space in mind. And if users are going to customize their touch bar to bring in more items than you initially allowed, you can specify visibility priority for your items. So if you have one that's really important and you always want it to be shown, give it a high priority, and lower ones will get bumped up. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop the presentation and go over to the app that I work on most during the day, Cinemagraph Pro. Again, if any of this looks interesting, come talk to me later, because we are looking for Mac and iOS people. So I'm going to try to mirror now. It's yellow. It's not supposed to be yellow. We'll cut all this out in post. Okay. Can everyone see that? Can everyone see the touch bar down at the bottom? Or how about if I move that to the top? Is that better? I can zoom in too. Is that okay? Or everyone can see that? I think we're all close enough. Okay, so if you've never seen it before, if you've never seen like Mark's presentation probably, this is a cinemagraph. It is basically a video that has part of it frozen in time. So it's a combination of a still photo and a moving video. So we have this woman standing here and the waves crashing in the background. And the way we choose the moving part is basically there's an image editor inside of this app, and we can paint the region that we want to have move. So the touch bar items that we decided to put in are mainly related to the masking controls. So we can toggle between painting and erasing. Then we also have brush size, hardness, and opacity in this segmented control here. And this is something called a popover, and it's sort of spring-loaded. So I can press and hold, and then it becomes a slider, and I can continue to move my finger without lifting it to adjust the size. So that's pretty nice. So that's a popover with a press and hold touch bar attached to it. Then I have a fairly simple toggleable button to show and hide the overlay mask overlay. And then I have another popover here that shows a range control to select the start and end point of the loop. So if I drag that, I can change the end point, and you'll notice that the main timeline control also updates. And then we can also pick the still image that I want to show. Oops. Apparently I don't know how to use it. So we thought that those were the most important masking and timeline-related features that we wanted to bring to the touch bar. And our app is not really a traditional productivity app, so we don't really have like things like multiple selection or different objects. There's basically one object that you're editing at a time, which is the cinematograph. And these are the things that apply to that. And then we do have a separate mode, though. So I'll enter crop mode here, and it gets its own touch bar. So in here, we're able to rotate and flip, as well as do straightening adjustments using this custom control here. And then there's another popover that shows just a stack of buttons that I can use to pick an aspect ratio for the crop. And finally, I can reset, and then here's a customized escape button, which just exits out of that mode. That's about it for Cinematograph Pro. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Aaron?
The scrubber that you showed earlier, like the copy of the one at the bottom of the screen, that's a native control that you can adopt?
Oh, sorry. No, it's not.
It's not, so you have to custom make that?
Yeah, so we made that custom. We already had this existing timeline control, and it was easier for us to, instead of even subclassing, just add the concept of a display style to that class. That gives it a little different metrics. So it uses a different like handle image, and it's squatter in appearance, and the grippers are a little bigger.
So same thing with the orientation, rotation?
Yeah, I'll go back to that as well.
That one?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is also a custom control.
That's nice.
Thanks. We did look to the Photos app for inspiration. If that seems familiar. Okay. Anyone else, or I'll just go back to the presentation? Okay. Don't save. Separate display. Okay. So how do you get started? First, buy a new MacBook Pro. No, you don't have to do that. As of Xcode 8.1 and macOS 10.12.1, that specific build or later, there's a simulator that ships with the dev tools, and symbols for touch bar and everything are included in AppKit. There are two other open source, or the first one's open source, projects that might be helpful. There's this touch bar server app. I don't know if you saw, like 2 months ago at the last meeting, I had an iPad Pro connected to a MacBook, and that's what I was doing. So it uses private API to display the touch bar UI on an iOS device, and it handles the touch input and routes it over. That's pretty neat. And then Daniel Jelkut from Red Sweater Software has something called Touche, which is sort of like a better simulator. To show the simulator, just open up Xcode 8.1 and hit Command-Shift-5. And it's impossible to get a screenshot of the touch bar with your app's UI in it, because grab and screen capture actually have touch bar support. So that's the best I could do. Simulator's pretty good. It does have some weird bugs with images being left on screen, and it also doesn't support multi-touch. So if you're about to ship an app, maybe go to an Apple store and try to, run a demo of your software on it. Okay. So the actual main class you're going to use is NS Touch Bar, and it lives in AppKit. It's composed of one or more NS Touch Bar items, as well as other touch bar instances that come from other responders in the responder chain. You can provide items up front or lazily. There's also rudimentary IB support for configuring a touch bar. And you can also group items together in groups and popovers like I showed you to make your touch bar show another touch bar, sort of modally. And then you get this concept of nesting where very high-level responders that are close to the application object can show high-level actions alongside more specific, like first responder touch bars that would come from, like, say, your current selection in Keynote or something like that. So how does the system actually find a touch bar? There's a new protocol called NS Touch Bar Provider. It has one property that returns an optional touch bar instance, and it has to be KVO compliant. This is because AppKit is going to observe the provider's touch bar property. So you can nil it out if you want to, and the system will notice that and then requery for a new touch bar instance. So we use that in our app when we switch modes from the normal mode to crop mode. It's the same object that's providing the touch bar, but we sort of replace the touch bar wholesale, and KVO is how that's accomplished. Now every NS responder in AppKit now conforms to NS Touch Bar Provider. So it declares a read-write touch bar property. You can set it yourself. IB will also set it if you use IB to configure it. And there's also this convenient override point for creating a touch bar lazily. So chances are in your Cocoa app you're going to have a lot of subclasses of NS responder if you're subclassing NS view or NS view controller, window controller, all those guys. So that's where you should be overriding and returning your touch bar instance. So I'm just going to quickly walk through a simplified version of how touch bars are discovered. So starting with the key Windows first responder, if there isn't a key window, it'll do the main window. Starting at the first responder, the system is going to ask for a touch bar. Your app might provide one like this. Then it's going to keep walking up the responder chain pinned at that first responder object. And for each next responder, it's going to ask, do you have a touch bar? Do you have a touch bar? Do you have a touch bar? And each one is given an opportunity to return a touch bar. And if they, in their default items, include this other items proxy identifier, the system is going to nest these touch bars together, like so. So I just skipped over the rest of the hierarchy there. If something were to provide a touch bar and didn't include the other items proxy, the touch bar composition that is closer to the first responder would take precedence. So this is all you're going to see, even if the application object, for example, provides like a button. This will take precedence over that. So what is a touch bar item? It's the base class that all touch bar item subclasses inherit from. You need to provide a globally unique string identifier. That's a requirement for the system. And then there are 4 concrete subclasses that I'm going to talk about: custom bar item, slider, popover, and group. There are more specific ones: color picker, candidate list for sort of like autocomplete and predictive stuff, and then share button. And then there are a couple of special system identifiers that encode spaces and the other items proxy. Those don't actually have touch bar item classes or subclasses. Those are just unique system strings that the system knows what to do with those. So if you want to put buttons and segmented controls in your touch bar, what you're going to do is create an instance of NS custom touch bar item. In macOS 10.12 Sierra, there are a whole bunch of new convenience initializers. I don't know if you've ever tried to use the default initializer for NS button, but you basically get something out of next step. So don't use those. Use the new convenience initializers. Those will make sure that they behave nicely in the touch bar appearance. And if you have custom images, you want to set those as template images so that the system can really get them to match the appearance of the keyboard. Because the system dynamically manages the brightness and maybe the white point as well of the touch bar on the keyboard. So that's how you can sort of blend in with everything and appear as if you're part of the hardware. Finally, configure your controls using target action or bindings, and then assign the custom items view property. Sliders are a little different. They have their own touch bar item subclass. Don't just use NS slider. So these are going to behave nicely when you do a popover with a touch and press and hold gesture, so you can get that nice continuous effect. They also optionally have a label or min-max images. They do expose a slider property that you can configure using bindings or target action, however you like. Or if you need to use a subclass for some reason, you can reassign it. It's a read-only property. This might address what some people hate about AppKit, is that you can't really customize the appearance of things. They're getting a little better. You can make a yellow button, for example, without having to subclass. You can also change the slider's track color and segmented bezel color. There are also a whole bunch of new template images. You only want to use these in a touch bar. They're designed specifically for it, but they're pretty nice, and they're what Control Strip uses, I think. And then moving along, popovers I already showed you in Cinemagraph Pro. So when you put them in a touch bar, they appear as a single item. You can customize their title image or provide a completely custom view. In Cinemagraph Pro, it appears as a segmented control, but then when you tap on it, it actually shows the popover. And you can configure different touch bars that are shown based on a single tap or the press and hold gesture. So if you're going to use a press and hold gesture, it's recommended that you have a very simple popover that you show. So generally a single control, something that can react to that nice sliding gesture. So an example is just a single slider. Otherwise, you might show a slider and then a scrubber or a bunch of buttons or a segmented control or something like that. If you do use a custom view for the collapsed representation, there's this standard popover gesture recognizer that you should attach to the view so that you can make sure that press and hold works properly and the touch events get propagated to the new touch bar instance that gets shown. And I guess I'll just breeze right over this. You can group items together and then move them around as a group. And then inside that group, you can also customize the items. So if you have a group of similar controls, you could reorder them, but then in the touch bar that contains that group, move the group around as a group, if that makes sense. Then finally, NS Scrubber, you could probably do a presentation entirely on it. It's like a collection view, but it's linear. It can be scrolling or fixed, and it is totally customizable. All of the item views that it contains, those can be overridden with your own subclasses. It can have a custom background color or view, and totally custom layouts. There are a couple built-in layouts. So there's the built-in flow layout, similar to UI collection view flow layout, and there's also a proportional width one. Both of them give you sort of nice system standard appearances, but if you want to go nuts, you can go nuts. So the top one there I have is the tab interface for Safari, switching tabs. And then the one under it is sort of a custom control for picking like a line dash pattern. It can also optionally show arrows if you want. Okay, so those are a whole bunch of different items that, hi. Those are a whole bunch of different items that you can put in your touch bars. So how do you actually go about doing that? The preferred way is to be lazy. So like I said before, chances are you have a responder subclass and you're going to override make touch bar to return a touch bar. In there, you're going to provide a list of default items that go in your touch bar. Those are basically just strings. Those are those globally unique identifiers. And then you can assign yourself or some other object as the delegate of the touch bar. And then later, the touch bar is going to ask its delegate to provide items so that it can put them inside of itself. And then you just switch on the identifier, create the items and return them. And if there's something that you don't recognize, just return nil and it won't show up. You can also not be lazy. You can do everything up front. This is convenient if you have a fixed bar that's not customizable and you just want to get it on the screen. This is also what IB will do. So it will actually take fully realized NS Touch Bar item instances and put them in this template items set. And at runtime, when the touch bar needs to look up an item, it's first going to consult its template item set for one that matches the identifier that's in the default item identifiers array. And if it finds one, it will put one in there. Otherwise, it will ask the delegate. Supporting customization. It's really easy to do, and in general, you should if you can. There's not a great reason not to, at least for the top level of your application. An example where you wouldn't really want to support customization is if in your top level you have a popover that shows some fixed touch bar. Those are okay to not customize, but generally you should try to customize if you can. Customization is opt-in. So the easiest way to do that is sometime very early on in your application's lifetime, you want to set this property to true. That's nsapp.isAutomatic customized touch bar menu item enabled. If that is true, and a touch bar has a customization identifier and an array of customization allowed identifiers, and it's the current touch bar, then that menu item will become enabled. Sorry. Also, just make sure that all of your items have a customization label, because that's what's going to be used underneath the item in the customization UI. So this is an example of mail. There's the default set, which is created from that default item identifiers array that you set on a touch bar instance. And then these are all of the customization allowed item identifiers. And it's also important that you use the delegate and be lazy when providing these, because you don't want to provide all of the items up front if they're not going to be included in the user's choice of customized items. So that would just be wasteful, right? So it's easier to just be lazy and provide the items that the user wants. And finally, here's how you can replace the escape key. They just added this in Xcode 8.2. It used to be private API, and it just became public. So there is an escape key replacement item identifier that you set on your touch bar instance, and it will find the item like touch bars normally do, either in the template items set or via the delegate method. And there's an example of that. So that's just a regular custom touch bar item with an NS button as its view, and the bezel color has been customized. Okay. Now on to the demo app, which is totally not a clone of Keynote. In just a sec, I'm going to do mirroring again, and hopefully we don't get that weird yellow stuff again. Okay. Where did I put Xcode? Okay. And I'll drag the simulator up to the top again. Okay. Actually, I'm going to close this for a sec. So here's a Cocoa application that you might have. It's a very, very basic vector shape canvas arranger thing. So I have these three shapes that I can move around. I can make a selection. I can drag them. I can change the fill color, the line width, the opacity, and the stroke color. Okay? Yeah, right? So now let's look into adding touch bar support for that. So the first thing we're going to add is a sort of top-level item for adding a shape, because that's a pretty common action. And we're going to do that using Interface Builder. So here's a top-ish level responder. Basically, it's above the canvas. This is the split view controller that the canvas is embedded in. And we can drag, that's the media browser. You can drag a touch bar instance into that responder. I've already done that. So here's the touch bar. And I've added just a simple touch bar button from the items palette. I've also added the other items proxy. So if you recall, that's going to enable us to compose touch bars together. So this higher level responder is going to provide the add new shape button, and a lower level responder is going to provide controls that are related to the selection. I also just forgot that this is actually a popover. So when you tap on this plus button, what you're actually going to show is another touch bar that itself has 3 different buttons. And the action for each of them, if I can find it, is this add shape popover action. And basically these 3 things have different tags. We're going to switch on the tag, and based on that, we will pick a shape. So despite using tags, it is written in Swift. And it's going to boil down to the same action as that toolbar. So if you want to see the action, where did I put it? Right here. So the reason I have a separate action is that we want to dismiss the popover. When you pick something, you don't want to have the popover hanging around, and then it's going to call down to the canvas view controller to actually do the add shape action. Okay. So I should be able to add a shape now. Ta-da! It works. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is add a touch bar for selected objects in the canvas that will allow us to do all of the things that the inspector allows us to do. So here's my canvas view. If you'll recall, a view is a responder, so we're able to override make touch bar. If we don't have a selection, we're going to return nil. We don't provide a touch bar. But if we do have a selection, we're going to use this canvas selection touch bar provider class that I made just to group everything together. We don't want to have like a million unnecessary delegate methods in this class. We're going to provide that instance is touch bar. And also, if I scroll up to the definition of selection, you'll find that one of the things we do here is invalidate the touch bar. So AppKit is going to observe that and see that the touch bar gets nilled out and then ask us for a new touch bar. And if our selection changes because we deleted an object, for example, then we're not going to provide a touch bar. So the selection touch bar that's embedded will just go away. So if you download the sample code, most of the interesting stuff is in this class, the touch bar provider class here. So I'll scroll up to the top, and these are the things that we're going to provide in our touch bar. We're going to have an opacity control. That's going to be a slider, a fill color, a stroke color, a line style. That's going to be a popover that has a line width slider, and a dash pattern scrubber. And then these aren't going to be included in the default items array, but they're to show an example of customization. So we're going to have a bunch of Z ordering controls like send to back, bring to front, etc. So you'll notice in Objective-C, this is just going to be a typedef for a string. In Swift, it comes across as a struct. And a convenient way to group all of these things is to make an extension on the struct and make static let constants for them all. So you can just use basically dot syntax member access later on to refer to them. And similarly, another globally unique string that you need is a customization identifier. So we're going to provide one for our canvas selection touch bar that lets us customize that touch bar at runtime. This is just some storage for the class. Here we're conforming to touch bar provider. So this is not an NS responder subclass. So to fulfill the requirements of the protocol, we have to be KVO compliant. So what I'm going to do is disable automatic notification, and then in the touch bar method that I implement, when I create one, I'm going to say that that key path is changing, assign it, and then notify the system that it did change. So if for some reason AppKit were going to observe us, we would do the right thing. And then we override make touch bar. So this is going to be similar to what you'd see in a responder subclass. We just happen to move it to a different class. So we create a touch bar, assign ourselves as the delegate. That's declared down in an extension somewhere. We assign a customization identifier that lets the system know we support customization. We provide an array of default items. So we're going to have the opacity slider, a space, and then 2 color pickers, and then a line style popover. And then here are all of the things that we allow the user to customize. If there was something that were really important, we could use a property called customization required item identifiers, and that would prevent the user from removing that item. Then after setting everything, we're going to return the touch bar, and then wait until the system calls back into us using the NS touch bar delegate protocol, which we implement, and again only has one method, which is just touch bar make item for identifier. So it's going to pass in both the touch bar instance that we gave to it and the identifier that it's trying to populate. And it's our responsibility to switch on that identifier and return an appropriate touch bar item. So the opacity item is pretty straightforward. It's just an instance of slider touch bar item. All of these have customization labels so that in the customization UI, they have labels. That's also used in the accessibility system. So even if you don't support customization, you should provide it anyway. And then we also have min and max value accessory images. So it's just going to be like a dimmed out circle and a full circle to represent low and high opacity. Set the min max values and then bind the slider's value binding to our controller object. That controller that was passed in by the canvas view, its content object is going to match the current selection in the canvas. So whatever our current selection is, the opacity of this, or the value of this slider is going to be bound to that object's opacity. And then finally, to prevent the slider from taking up the entire width, we're going to specify that it should be 180 points wide or less, and then return that item. The color pickers are not super interesting. They're just color picker items. There are different factory methods for different color pickers that show a different image, but they essentially work the same way. They don't support bindings, which is a little unfortunate. They have to use target action. So we implement this take fill color and take stroke color that will just take the color and then apply it to the selection. And then finally, well, let's just run this for now. And then I'll show you how to do a popover last. Okay, so here's a touch bar again. So now I'm going to use the touch bar to create a circle. And notice it becomes selected as well. And we also get this selected item touch bar up here. And when I have nothing selected, it goes away. That's because we're nilling out the touch bar, and AppKit is requerying us for a new touch bar instance, and we return nil. Okay, so I can play with the opacity. I can use a color picker to change the fill color. I think this interface is really cool. You can even provide a custom color list and even color patterns. So if you had like checkers or dots or whatever the default like Adobe Photoshop 2.0 ones are. The color pickers also act as spring-loaded or press and hold popovers. So with a continuous gesture, you can select from that list. So that's kind of cool. I can also change the stroke color. I'll just increase the line width so you can see it. Oh, another thing is that these, here I'll click with the mouse. These accessories actually act as little increment decrement buttons. So that's kind of cool. Okay, and then I also showed you how to customize things. So we set a customization identifier on the selection touch bar, and also early on in the app delegate, we set NSApp is automatic customized touch bar menu item enabled to true. So at runtime, the system in our view menu is going to create this customized touch bar menu item that will show the customized palette. I don't know why when it's mirroring, it does this weird streaky stuff with the mouse. So you'll notice that, here, I'm going to use my fingers actually, but you'll be able to see what I'm doing up there. So I can reorder stuff within the selection touch bar, but remember that touch button is provided by a different touch bar. It's provided by the split view controller's touch bar. That thing is not customizable. So no matter what I do, I can't remove that thing. I can only remove things that are contained in this touch bar. So I can reorder them, or I can drag with the mouse, send to back. I can drag it down here. Trust me, it looks cooler on an actual Mac. It's sort of floating down into the touch bar, and then using the mouse, I can move it around, right? So I'm going to position it over here. And then you can also drag the default set. This is all very similar to NS Toolbar, if you've ever customized one of those. You can drag the entire default set down. Okay, so there, I'm happy with the customization I made. So I'll create another, here's another shape. Now I'm going to use that new send to back button, and it works, hooray. Okay. So I think the last thing I'm going to show you is making a popover. So I'm just going to hide this again. So if you recall, the popover identifier that we're going to use, the item identifier is line style. So we create a NS popover touch bar item using that identifier, set the customization label so it shows up. We're going to use the default collapsed representation, but we're going to customize the image, and that's that sort of three diagonal line image that you might have seen. And then there are two different touch bars that we're going to specify on the popover. There's going to be popover touch bar, so that's what gets shown when you just do a single tap, and then there's press and hold touch bar, which is what gets shown when you press and hold. Big surprise. And I don't know if you can read that, but those are two different methods. Make line style popover touch bar and make line style press and hold touch bar. So let's look at the press and hold one first. It is super simple. I have a convenience method down here that configures a slider. You've seen that already. So we want to return a touch bar that the popover is going to use for its press and hold action. So we create a new instance of a touch bar, set the default item to be that slider's identifier, and then we're going to give it a single template item. So here we're specifying everything up front. We're not going to use a delegate to provide the items. We're going to stuff everything into this template item set, and then just return the touch bar. The single tap popover touch bar is a little more complicated. So first we're going to do the line width slider, just as before, and then we're going to do a second item. And it's going to be a custom touch bar item, and its custom view is going to be a scrubber. And a scrubber can have a custom layout. We're going to use the system's proportional layout here. A custom background, selection style, a mode. So in this case, it's going to be fixed. You're not going to be able to scroll. And we're going to make it show arrow buttons. We're going to set ourselves as the delegate so we get notified when the user taps on something. And I have this custom data source object that is going to set itself as the scrubber's data source and also register some views. Very, very similar to UI collection view or UI table view even on iOS, and now NS collection view as well on OS X or macOS. Yeah, I mean, this is going to look totally analogous to you, right? You just return a number of items, and then you return a view for an item at index. So in this case, we're going to create an image item view and set an image that represents a line style on that view, and then just make it so the image scales proportionally down instead of being scaled up, because that would look bad. And then finally, when we, as the scrubber delegate, get notified that the selection has changed, we're going to take the selection index, look up the line style, and apply it to the controller's content. So that will effectively set the line style on the current selection. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I'm just going to make one rectangle. I'm going to use the press and hold line style popover. So you'll see that only returns a single control, which is a slider, which lets you change the line width from small to large, thin to thick. And then when I let go, it goes away. However, if I do a single tap, it's going to use the other popover touch bar item that we configured. So that includes the same slider and this scrubber thing. So here are some crazy styles that you can use. And that is about it for my contrived example. Does anybody have any questions? Was anything really confusing? Yeah.
Did you say that touch bar is the reason or a symptom of flat
Any real questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is like the first Swift-built API that Apple's made?
I'm sorry?
Do you think this API was written in Swift?
Well, it's all part of AppKit, and
Part of AppKit.
as far as I know, AppKit is still written in Objective-C. I don't think they can even distribute frameworks in Objective-C,
I'm curious because of the,
or Swift, sorry. I think some of the system components, like control strip, are written in Swift. Steve Troughton-Smith is a good guy to follow for stuff like that. He's always tearing stuff apart.
and this touch bar item identifier,
Yep,
like it's not an object,
it's a string. Yeah, it gets imported into Swift as a struct. And the way they do that is with the NS extensible string enum. I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly. The order might be different, but it's something like that. It's a special macro that says when this gets imported into Swift, give it a special type.
I don't see that kind of style, that technique used
In Swift.
in Tacow frameworks.
Oh, well, so if I were to write this in Objective-C, they would literally just be strings. And that's a pretty common thing for Tacow, right? Yeah. Like,
See it done this way.
if anyone's done like NS toolbar stuff, all the identifiers are strings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And like cell reuse, all that stuff.
I'm surprised that they use target action.
Yeah.
You know,
As opposed to what, bindings?
Well, no, even like block-based APIs.
Yeah. I mean, it is nice in that the target is weak, so you're not going to create retain cycles, and you can just throw the thing away, and it won't be retaining you. I don't know. It's sort of easier to use in some places. Wayne?
Just curious, I mean, that you advised about the view, and for pop-over, can you pop up more popovers like stack?
Sorry?
Do popovers stack up if you decide to pop over another?
I think you can stack multiple ones, but as soon as you dismiss one, I think it unwinds to the root. And in the HIG anyway, it says don't do that. I think you can. Yeah. I know before the escape key replacement item identifier thing was public, I tried to abuse popovers to hide the escape key, because you can also, on a popover, you can configure it to not show a default close button and instead provide your own. So I was trying to really, really abuse that to hide the escape key. But it turns out there's a perfectly good API for that, and it's public now, so yeah.
Have you got feedback from Flixel users on the touch bar stuff? Are people using it?
I think we have. I don't remember, though.
Do you use it?
Yeah, all the time.
Do you use touch bar for other apps?
When I remember to. Yeah.
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what
Has it changed your habits?
I've replaced the Siri item in control strip with a play pause one. I don't know what that says, but I just think it's really cool to hack around on, and I don't know, we'll see what people do in the future with it. Yeah. I do have just a couple more slides.
Can you
Yeah.
animate?
I'm sorry?
Can you do animations on the touch bar?
Yeah, you can.
Like a fireplace?
You probably could. I mean, I meant to include some of these videos. Some people have like sushi bars going across, or lemmings. People have played Pac-Man. People have played something. It's not Asteroid, but it's something similar. It's like a linear like helicopter game. People did Doom. Sorry?
Steve Locomotive was on there.
Yeah. All sorts of crazy stuff. Okay, I just had a really quick note about deploying back to earlier versions of macOS. So at the start of the talk, I said you need at least macOS 10.12.1. There's a special build of it that became available, but as of Xcode 8.2, all of the symbol availability for Touch Bar has changed to macOS 10.12.2. In Objective-C, it's not really a big deal because you're generally going to do check class from string that it exists to do your check, or your responder class responds to the selector touch bar, and that was always usually the guidance that you should be doing anyway. But things get a little complicated in Swift because Swift has something called availability checks that will prevent you from calling certain API that are marked as available in a certain build without telling the compiler that you're doing so. So what this is going to do is prevent you from calling APIs that are now declared as being available in 10.12.2. However, it is not going to prevent old versions of AppKit, like the one that shipped with this thing, that is still technically macOS 10.12.1. It's not going to prevent AppKit from calling into your NSObject subclass and calling make touch bar on you. So if you have application state that that depends on that, you are going to have bugs. And this actually happened to us in Cinemagraph Pro. So I told you that we nil out our touch bar when you switch modes, right? So we had a Swift method called invalidate touch bar that didn't have any availability stuff on it, and then inside we would check the version. So on On 10.12.2, it would call set touch bar nil. And that method was prevented, or that body was prevented from running on 10.12.11 machines that did have touch bars. So there was an inconsistency there where AppKit would call make touch bar on us. We would give it the default touch bar, and then if you entered crop mode, it wouldn't invalidate it. It would just stay there all the time. So basically the workaround for that is if you're writing in Swift, you could just punt and say if I'm on lower than 10.12.2, just don't make a touch bar. Or you could do that check in Objective-C and do response to selector. Or you could also use KVC, I guess, to work around the availability thing. And then finally, I just have a list of resources, basically everything from Apple. The developer portal has a Mac Apps plus Touch Bar section. Check out the HIG, there's a lot of good stuff. The NS Touch Bar API reference is very, very detailed. It's really good. And there are 2 Touch Bar sample codes selections. There's NS Touch Bar catalog that shows you basically all of the items you can do, along with all of the customizations for things like Scrubber. And then also toolbar sample that shows you a really simple example. And then that final link is a link to a bunch of dumb videos if you want to see Doom and Pac-Man and everything. Okay, I already posted the code on my GitHub account and tweeted it. I'll message the group, I guess, afterwards as well. And that is it. Thanks. Okay.
Any more questions for Ryder?
Ryder.
Yep.
Have you played around with the Xcode plugins at all? I was wondering if you could add a touch bar
Yeah.
to Xcode.
I don't know. I haven't looked at that at all. So it's all sort of headless though, right? Like you have a principal class and it calls into you and it's some subclass of NS object or something. Like, do you provide UI at any point, or do you just provide like,
I honestly don't
this
know.
is the thing I can do, please dynamically make a menu item that represents me?
I honestly don't
Okay,
know, right?
yeah.
I think I looked at the interface once.
Right.
There's 4 methods you get or something.
Yeah.
But I don't know what
Okay,
it's set from.
I wouldn't think so, but if you're in any extension that has UI, you might be able to, if you can become first responder. I don't know.
Become first responder. I was hacking around with Touch Bar a while ago.
Yeah.
And trying to do it in any command line app.
Yeah.
Having the proper first responder chain, you want to do everything, and I wasn't able to get the toolbar to show up in a command line.
Oh, okay.
Flipping over to a proper app is fine.
Right.
So there might be something similar with Xcode extensions.
Right, maybe you have to be a proper application bundle, yeah, or a GUI app. Yeah, so you can actually link AppKit in a command line app? Huh. Okay.